The great question. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you've ever told yourself about who you are, what you want, what you fear, what you've forgiven, what you've outgrown, wasn't entirely true. Not a total lie, perhaps, but a curated truth, softened and edited like a photo with the blemishes brushed out. Picture yourself standing in front of the mirror, not just a literal one, but the kind of mirror that reflects your inner life, your quiet choices, your unspoken griefs, and for the first time, it doesn't blink. It just stares back, unflinching, offering no comfort. And you ask yourself, who am I really, when no one else is watching? Would you dare answer that question honestly? Or would you flinch, blink, turn away like we all do? Because sometimes the real danger isn't the lies other people tell us, but the ones we whisper to ourselves just to survive the day. Now imagine your entire life as a house, and each self-deception, small or large, a brick. Not malicious, not dramatic, just subtle conveniences. I'm fine, when you're not. This job is what I want, when you hate it. I've moved on, when that one person still haunts your dreams. These bricks stack over the years until the walls rise so high you can't see out. You don't even realize you're trapped. You just think this is what life is supposed to feel like. The ache in your chest becomes background noise. The hunger for something more becomes a faint nostalgia. And then, one day, a crack forms. Maybe it's a quiet breakdown, a restless night, a failed relationship. Or maybe it's just an inexplicable moment of clarity, like waking up in a room that's not your own and remembering you built it yourself. What if every time you lied to yourself, even just to get through the day, it carved a small fracture in your identity? What if you're not exhausted from life itself, but from the constant maintenance of your inner mythology? Because when you lie to others, you betray them. But when you lie to yourself, you betray your soul. And what's terrifying is how normal it feels. You smile at dinner parties, recite ambitions you've outgrown, perform identities that no longer fit, all because the truth feels too raw, too disruptive, too unknown. So you stay in the costume, you stay in the dream. And you wonder why you feel so far from home, even in your own body. What happens when that mask begins to crack? Do you lose yourself? Or do you finally find out what's underneath? Could it be that the version of you that you've buried under social scripts, family expectations, and psychological coping is the only one who's ever had a chance at peace? Or is it more dangerous than that? What if confronting the truth about yourself means admitting how long you've been asleep, how much time you've wasted, how much pain you've numbed just to keep functioning? And yet, what's the alternative? To continue living inside a theater of your own creation? To remain a ghost in your own story, always acting, never arriving? Are you okay with that? Or are you curious, terrified maybe, but curious enough to pull the thread? You see, this isn't just a philosophical exercise, it's a reckoning. Because when the illusions we craft about ourselves begin to unravel, what follows isn't clarity, it's chaos. But in that chaos, there's also something sacred, the beginning of truth. The moment you stop lying to yourself, even in the smallest way, you trigger an existential earthquake. It shakes everything. Your habits, your relationships, your dreams, your past, they all start to shift, and it hurts. But maybe that pain isn't destruction. Maybe it's birth. Maybe it's your first gasp of air outside the prison walls you mistook for shelter. So ask yourself, gently, quietly, what are you pretending not to know? What parts of your life feel off, no matter how well you justify them? What emotions are you avoiding because you've labeled them inconvenient or irrational? And most dangerously, what if the real version of you, the one that never needed editing, has been waiting this whole time for you to stop lying and finally come home? Let's go there. Let's peel back the mask and see what's left. But be warned, the truth doesn't care about your comfort. It only cares about your freedom. And that freedom comes with a cost. Are you ready to pay it? The hidden problem. Its psychological, philosophical roots. But what makes lying to oneself so seductive, so persistent, and so deeply woven into the human condition? Why do we cradle illusions even when reality taps us gently or violently on the shoulder, reminding us of truths we'd rather not face? To answer this, we must look beneath the surface of habit, beyond the casual self-deceptions of daily life. and into the psychological architecture that compels us to construct a false self. The Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung once wrote that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. This avoidance isn't simply weakness, it's survival. Our minds, particularly the ego, are built to preserve a coherent narrative of who we are. This self-narrative offers us protection, a sense of continuity, control, and significance in a world that often feels chaotic and indifferent. To question it is to loosen the scaffolding around which our identity is formed. It's to risk psychological vertigo, the disorientation that comes when the foundations of one's reality begin to crumble. The hidden problem, then, is that most people would rather remain comfortably misaligned with truth than feel the terror of existential groundlessness. Consider how many lies are stitched into the fabric of your internal monologue. I'm fine. This relationship is working. I'll start tomorrow. They didn't mean to hurt me. These phrases, repeated like mantras, become truths by repetition alone. The mind, ever efficient, wires these patterns into the neurological framework. Studies in cognitive dissonance show that when people hold conflicting beliefs, such as knowing something is wrong but doing it anyway, they experience discomfort. Rather than change behavior, most people change the belief. They rationalize, reframe, reinterpret, not because they are evil or lazy, but because they are afraid. The lie is not a deliberate act of betrayal. It's anesthesia. It dulls the pain of cognitive dissonance. But the cost of this anesthesia is the dulling of the self, the suppression of potential, and the corrosion of meaning. Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist, spoke of this as bad faith, the act of deceiving oneself to avoid the responsibility of freedom. In Being and Nothingness, Sartre gives the example of a waiter who is too much a waiter, too precise, too polished, too performative. The man is not simply doing his job, he is playing a role, pretending to be what he is not. And by doing so, he lies to himself about the freedom he possesses. He is not bound to this identity, but he chooses it because it is safe. We do the same. We become our professions, our relationships, our routines, not because they define us, but because they excuse us from confronting who we might be if we stopped pretending. When you lie to yourself, you trade freedom for certainty. You avoid the anguish of potential by clinging to the comfort of what is already known, even if it's killing you. But the roots go deeper still. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that the human will, irrational and insatiable, is the true engine behind our illusions. We lie to ourselves not because we misunderstand reality, but because we are slaves to desire. Desire distorts perception. If we want something to be true, we'll find a way to make it seem true. This is not a bug in our consciousness, it's a feature. Evolution Fae, avid creatures who could construct pleasant fictions over those who were crippled by unbearable truths. The man who believes he still has time is less likely to panic. The woman who tells herself her partner will change is less likely to leave the tribe. Our lies are evolutionary armor built to defend the fragile organism from the unbearable clarity of truth. But this armor, once protective, becomes a cage. It grows heavier with each layer until one day the self beneath it suffocates. Contemporary psychology reinforces this. The false self, a term used by psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott, emerges when a person prioritizes external validation over internal truth. From a young age, we learn to smile when we're sad, to say thank you when we're humiliated, to perform politeness instead of expressing pain. Over time, the mask adheres to the face. We become actors in our own lives, unsure where the performance ends and the person begins. Social media amplifies this distortion. Our digital avatars, curated, filtered, endlessly praised, create a gulf between who we are and who we appear to be. And the more we invest in the illusion, the more we fear its collapse. The lie becomes sacred. To tell the truth would be to lose everything: status, community, identity. But perhaps the most sinister aspect of self-deception is its invisibility. When you lie to yourself, there is no external enemy to fight, no liar to confront. The betrayer is within you, and it wears your voice. It mimics your logic. It appeals to your fears and flatters your hopes. You cannot kill it with facts or dismantle it with willpower alone. Because it is not a single thought, It is the structure of thought itself. And so the lie persists, not because it is strong, but because it is hidden. It lives in the gaps between your emotions and your actions, between your memories and your narratives. It is the silence between the things you say and the things you mean. Yet even knowing all this, even understanding the psychological and philosophical scaffolding that holds this truth, a lie in place, most people remain committed to it. Why? Because the lie feels safer than the unknown. Carl Jung warned that the process of individuation, the journey toward becoming a whole, integrated self, requires confronting the shadow, the repressed parts of the psyche we fear to see. The lie keeps the shadow buried. To stop lying to yourself is to begin digging it up. And what you might find there, the rage, the longing, the brokenness, the brilliance, might just undo everything you thought you were. But it is also the only way to become who you truly are. The tragedy, then, is not that we lie to ourselves, but that we do it so well. We craft illusions not out of ignorance, but out of terror. We build false selves not because we don't know who we are, but because we're afraid to find out. And so we sleepwalk through our lives, wrapped in narratives that protect us from pain, but also from purpose, until, perhaps, something breaks, a moment, a loss, a crack in the mask. And then the lie begins to tremble. Do you feel it? That tremor beneath the story you've told yourself? That unsettling suspicion that something essential has been buried, that maybe, just maybe, the life you're living isn't the life you were meant to live. Hold that feeling, because in the next part, we'll look at what happens when the lie begins to unravel, not just in your mind, but in your world. And then it starts to happen, quietly, invisibly, and without permission. You begin to construct an identity on top of these lies, not the extravagant ones you'd confess to a friend as part of some entertaining story, but the subtle, interior lies you tell yourself so often that they become indistinguishable from the truth. I'm fine. I'm not lonely. This is what success looks like. You say them like mantras, not because they're true, but because the alternative, the raw, unfiltered truth, would threaten the very architecture of who you think you are. But like structural rot in a building, the cost of these lies doesn't show immediately. It reveals itself slowly, insidiously, in the way your motivation vanishes, your relationships turn mechanical, your joy feels counterfeit. Because every lie, even the ones aimed inward, requires energy to sustain. You spend that energy each day, maintaining facades, avoiding mirrors, steering conversations away from the vulnerable corners of your being. The lie becomes a second skin, and the skin starts to itch. Carl Jung warned that what you resist not only persists, it grows in size. What begins as a minor self-deception mutates into a massive psychological blind spot. Over time, you become incapable of seeing your real self at all. And when that happens, you don't just lie to yourself, you become the lie. Everything you do becomes rooted in the need to preserve the illusion. You chase goals not because they matter to your soul, but because they're consistent with the story you're performing. You pursue relationships, jobs, aesthetics, even spiritual practices that all reinforce the version of you you've sworn to uphold. But here's the tragedy. Even when you win, you lose. Because every victory achieved under a false self deepens the split within. You stand on the podium, holding the medal, smiling for the camera, while a part of you quietly wonders, who exactly did this for me? This dissonance has a name. It's called existential fraudulence, and it doesn't feel like fear or guilt. It feels like emptiness, like drinking seawater to quench a thirst that only grows stronger. This is where the consequences really begin to unravel you. You wake up in a life that technically belongs to you, but none of it feels right. You don't recognize the furniture, the conversations bore you. Your body, though technically healthy, feels like a costume, and the silence in your mind, the one you once found peaceful, now sounds like a question you can't answer. How did I get here? This isn't depression, it's not burnout. It's a soul-level disconnection, a psychological exile from your truest self, and it's more common than we admit, because our culture is built on layers of curated truths. Social media incentivizes aesthetic lies. Corporations sell you lifestyles, not products. Even therapy, in its more commercialized forms, can become another tool for managing symptoms instead of revealing truths. So the very systems meant to help you become whole might actually encourage you to stay fragmented. Viktor Frankl once said, "When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure." Look around. Isn't that what so many of us do? We stream videos until dawn, scroll endlessly, plan vacations we hope will fix us, spend hours comparing ourselves to people who are also pretending, because pleasure is easier than honesty. Comfort is safer than self-confrontation, but safety is not peace, and comfort is not fulfillment. The longer you avoid the truth, the more it begins to shape you in reverse. You become a stranger to your own desires. You stop asking big questions. You lose your appetite for risk, for change, for intimacy. And that's the quiet death, not of the body, but of the will. The will to see, to feel, to be fully present in your own story. At this point, the consequences spiral outward. Your relationships suffer first. Because no matter how well you lie to yourself, you can't lie to your nervous system. Your body knows when you're not being real. It stiffens in conversations. It gets exhausted after socializing. It avoids eye contact, even with people you love. Your partner senses it. Your friends notice something's off. But they can't name it because you can't either. The tragedy compounds when your deepest connections begin to wither, not from conflict, but from lack of authenticity. Love requires presence, but lies create distance. So even when you're together, you're apart. Your professional life might suffer too, but in more subtle, soul-eroding ways. You may climb the ladder, hit the metrics, even earn accolades. But it all feels like a role in a play you forgot you auditioned for. Work becomes mechanical. Achievements taste like dust. You may even start to sabotage your own success, not out of laziness, but because some buried part of you knows it isn't aligned with your real values. That part of you rebels, not loudly, but through procrastination, disinterest, or creative burnout. Meanwhile, your inner life grows quieter, not in the meditative sense, but in the dissociative one. You stop dreaming vividly. You stop journaling. You avoid solitude because it feels like sitting in a room with a stranger who won't stop asking questions you don't want to answer.
Why are you really doing this? Who are you trying to impress? What are you so afraid of seeing? These aren't accusations, they're invitations. But when you ignore them long enough, they become ghosts. And eventually, the silence becomes unbearable. The most haunting part, you can't escape it by running. You can change cities, partners, jobs, aesthetics, but wherever you go, you take the lie with you. It's stitched into your language, your habits, your expectations, until one day something cracks. Maybe it's a breakdown, maybe it's a divorce, maybe it's just waking up one morning and feeling nothing at all. That crack isn't the end, it's the beginning, because for the first time the mask slips, and what you glimpse beneath it is not weakness, not shame, not failure, but the original self, still waiting, not broken, just buried. In that moment you have a choice, and that choice, though terrifying, leads to everything that matters. But before we can step into that rebellion, we must understand what it truly means to stop lying to ourselves, not in theory, but in...
Tyon, the rebellion, how to break free. But what if you stopped? Not gradually, not eventually, but now. What if you declared a quiet, private war against every lie you've been trained to live with? The rebellion doesn't start with a shout. It begins in the smallest corner of your mind where silence lives, the place where your real voice has been whispering all along. And no, it doesn't scream freedom in fireworks and revolutions. It mutters something far more terrifying. You have to start over. To stop lying to yourself is to tear up the script you've rehearsed your whole life and say, "This was never me." But let's not pretend this is easy. To stop lying to yourself is to risk the very identity you've spent decades constructing. The job title, the good citizen act, the loyal friend mask, the "I'm fine" mantra. What happens when you admit you're not okay with how your life turned out? That the things you post are not what you feel? That the love you show is obligation and habit, not fire or truth? That rebellion, small and invisible to the outside world, feels like death, because it is. The death of illusion. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once said, The most common form of despair is not being who you are. And that's exactly it. Most people aren't suffering because life is cruel, but because they've been living a version of it that isn't theirs. The first step in rebellion isn't quitting your job or running off to a monastery. It's standing in front of a mirror and saying, "That's not who I am anymore." You may still go to work the next day. You may still smile in photos. But something shifts. You start becoming allergic to your own performance. You feel the weight of every false yes, every forced laugh, every carefully curated sentence that shields people from your inner truth. The lies begin to itch, and then you stop scratching. You let the discomfort burn. It's in that fire you forge a self. Viktor Frankl, survivor of Auschwitz and author of Man's Search for Meaning, wrote that suffering ceases to be suffering the moment it finds meaning. The rebellion, then, is not about escaping discomfort. It's about choosing discomfort with meaning over comfort with decay. And so you start asking different questions, not, "What will people think?" but, "What do I think?" Not, "Is this normal?" but, "Is this honest?" You may find that your friendships thin out. People accustomed to your lies, the agreeable, predictable you, may bristle at your clarity. But those who remain will see something rare, a person becoming whole. You'll also face unexpected withdrawals. There's a strange addiction in self-deception. Lies numb. They help us avoid the unhealed wounds underneath. When you stop lying, those wounds start to ache. Memories you buried claw their way up. The moment your father told you to toughen up, the day your teacher called you stupid, the relationship where you kept giving more than you received, all of it floods in. But here's the radical truth. Healing doesn't begin in light. It begins in exposure. When the lies dissolve, the hurt surfaces, but so does your power to finally process it. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we disown and hide. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Rebellion is integration. It is making the unconscious conscious, not to feel good, but to feel real. You begin noticing how many of your decisions were fear in disguise, how often you said yes just to avoid conflict, how many dreams you abandoned, not because they were impossible, but because someone once laughed when you shared them. And then something dangerous happens. You stop caring if people understand, because you've finally begun to understand yourself. You don't need their approval anymore. You need your own, so you start speaking differently. You don't say, "I'm just tired," when what you mean is, "I'm overwhelmed and I feel like I'm disappearing in this routine." You don't say "it's fine" when it isn't. You don't smile when someone crosses a boundary. You stop playing nice and start being kind, which are very different things. Niceness is control. Kindness is clarity. One hides, the other reveals. Over time, your life rearranges itself to match this new vibration. Maybe you write again, or you leave that soul-sucking job, or you admit you don't want to be married anymore, or you move to a city that feels like you. Or maybe none of that happens. Maybe it's all internal. Maybe for the first time in your life, you sleep at night without pretending. And maybe that's enough. It doesn't mean you become invincible. The world still bites. People still misunderstand. But now, you know who's getting hurt. And that makes all the difference. The real you bleeds, and the real you heals. Rebellion, then, isn't loud or flashy. It's a quiet, stubborn commitment to stop betraying yourself for acceptance, comfort, or the illusion of success. It's the moment you stop playing a character in someone else's script and start writing your own. So if you're still wondering whether it's worth it, the discomfort, the loss, the confusion, ask yourself, what's the alternative? To keep living a life that isn't yours? To keep wearing a mask until it becomes your face? No. The rebellion is messy, lonely, and slow, but it's honest. And in a world addicted to illusion, that is the rarest kind of power. The ultimate truth. The final, most powerful realization. And then something strange happens. After the lies have been burned to ash, after the defenses have crumbled, after the hollow rituals of self-deception have stopped echoing through your inner halls, there is silence. Not the terrifying void you feared, not the soundless scream of an identity lost, but a sacred kind of stillness. For the first time, you are not performing. You are not bargaining with yourself. You are not running. And in this stillness, a truth emerges, not loudly, not with fanfare, but with a whisper that seems to come from the ancient roots of your being. That truth is this: who you are is not what you've been told, not what you pretended to be, not even what you thought you had to become to survive. Who you are has been waiting patiently underneath the rubble of all the stories you've been spinning to keep the pain away. You realize that all the lies were scaffolding, not because you were weak, but because you were not yet ready to see, and now you are. What you see, in this honest light, is not the perfect version of yourself. It is not some godlike, bulletproof ideal. What you see is a flawed, fragile, scared, hopeful, scarred, and luminous being who has carried pain like a sacred torch. You see the child you once were, the one who cried silently in the dark, who dreamed of being accepted, who wanted to scream the truth but didn't yet have the words. You see the teenager who learned to bury feelings just to make it through. You see the adult who learned to smile while dying inside, who said, "I'm fine," 1,000 times just to keep the illusion alive. But now you no longer need the illusion. Now, you are not just surviving. Now, you are awakening. And with this awakening comes grief. A deep, aching grief for the years you spent in hiding, for the people you never really let in, for the dreams you abandoned in the name of pragmatism, for the versions of yourself that were nothing more than armor. But alongside this grief comes something more powerful than you expected: gratitude. Not gratitude for the lies themselves, but for the fact that you are finally free of them. You feel like someone who has lived their whole life breathing through a straw, and now you've finally taken a full breath. The world hasn't changed. Your job may be the same. The people around you may not notice a difference. But inside, everything is different, because now you are living without pretending, and there is nothing more radical than that. And something else happens. You stop needing to win every argument. You stop bending over backward to earn validation. You stop editing yourself to be more palatable. You begin to live with a kind of quiet dignity, not because you are proud, but because you are rooted. You are no longer negotiating with your existence. You are no longer asking for permission to feel what you feel. You are no longer imprisoned by your own expectations. And this, perhaps more than anything, terrifies people who are still caught in their own maze of deception. But that's okay. Your honesty is not a weapon, it's a light, and it shines without asking for applause. Eventually you learn to hold space for your own contradictions. You stop needing to be perfectly consistent. You can say, "I was wrong," without collapsing. You can say, "I don't know," and still be worthy. You can be both a work in progress and a masterpiece at once. And you discover that honesty is not a single choice. It's a lifelong dance. There will still be moments where fear creeps in, where ego tries to retake the throne, where the old patterns whisper in your ear. But now you recognize them for what they are: echoes of the past, not truths of the present. The final realization is that truth does not save you from suffering. It doesn't guarantee happiness. What it does is give you back your life. Not the life that others expected of you, not the life curated for appearances, but the raw, unfiltered, tender, breathtaking life that is yours and yours alone. The life where you can sit with your own thoughts and not feel the need to run. The life where you can look in the mirror and say, "This is who I am," not with arrogance, but with peace. And from this place of peace, you begin to notice something else. The more honest you become with yourself, the more you attract others who are doing the same. Not perfect people, not always happy people, but people who are real. Conversations,